Welcome, welcome, welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about procrastination, something that we all struggle with. So, procrastination, how I helped a founder finally launch his succession plan. Before we get started, just wanted to kind of take this quote, and it's a book that I came across that I think is really relevant for today's conversation. It's by Charlie Maskey, and it says, "I can't see a way through," said the boy. "Can you see your next step?" "Yes, just take that," said the horse. So it's from the book, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And so I think it's really relevant for today's conversation where let's just take the next step. Let's not wait till tomorrow and hoping something's going to happen, but let's just go forward. And so when we talk about procrastination and succession planning all together, we have this clock, right? Tick tock, tick tock. And in this video, we're going to talk about that might not be so. Let's find a way to help someone who is on the verge of wanting to do something but hesitant to start, not knowing where they're going to be because there's no plan. And so this video is really going to go through a case study that I had with a client that was in the same situation where had been in the business for 30 plus years, hadn't really thought about succession, the formal sense that we kind of think about, always had in their mind what they wanted to do, thought about it, had some conversations here and there, but really never took the first step to move forward. So again, what we need to do is we also need to think about how this process protects our family, our business, and everything that we've created. And so, instead of being vague with intentions, let's be clear. Let's move forward with intention. Hey, just want to take a second of your time and let you know that there is an available scorecard for your use. It's free to use. Just comment scorecard in the comments. It's a tool that I use with a lot of my clients in our initial assessment phase, and I've digitized that into a Google form. And so it's 10 simple questions, less than 60 seconds, and it gives you a gauge of kind of where you are in the process. And you might be surprised, it's not that bad. So comment below, scorecard, and we'll send it to you shortly. Thanks and have a great day. So before we get started, my name is Tommy. I help business owners with unfinished succession plans turn into actionable roadmaps and without having to replace your advisors, keep the advisors that are around you, but also letting you get back to what's important to you, which is your business and obviously your family. And so in the 15 years that I've been inside of family offices of America's wealthiest families, what I've seen in terms of generational success, in terms of how businesses, assets, just I think family dynamics evolve over generations, it's really because they're planning with intention and not basing things on hope. And so hope is not a strategy. Like I said, leading with purpose, communicating with clarity, and planning with intention are three of the hallmarks that I've seen with a lot of families that I've worked with. And so the process that I take families through is really this journey, right? This four-phase journey of A, B, C, and D. Or really, it's the assessment phase, right? With any process that you take on or methodology, you have to have an assessment period. So you assess, then you build, right? You're starting to put the pieces together and think about how you want these inner workings to work together. These are crafting it, starting to perfect it, and starting to kind of mold it into what you want. And then you look at the deployment stage, right? Deploy. What's this going to look like when you're first out there testing this, maybe internally inside your office, inside your family, or in the real world? So again, this ABCD method is the approach that we'll talk about today. So again, take a little deeper dive in the assess piece, right? Confronting fears and clarifying visions, right? We have these ideas of what we want, what we think, but until we kind of go deep down and understand what is making us act a certain way, or why are we procrastinating? Why are we hesitating? Once you get to that understanding, that level one reality, then you're able to kind of go from there. And so that leads us into the build phase, right? Constructing a solid foundation amid uncertainty, right? We have these ideas of why the world does what it does. And we're afraid that if we do this, this is what's going to happen. But it all comes down on that foundation. If we have a solid foundation, a solid process, then that should solve 80% of the fears that you might have that really don't exist. And so then we go into the craft phase, right? Refining the details with precision and care, right? Precision is laser focus, but also care that things can change as you're going through this phase. So let's just start. Let's get the motion moving in the right direction. And then we'll figure out if there's some tweaks and nips and tucks that have to happen with our planning. And then the last phase, the deploy, right? Launching with confidence, amid sustainable, assurance, making sure that when you do set forward past the breaker walls, that you're getting into uncharted waters. If that plan is in place and you've practiced and you're testing it out, a new motor in a boat or a new sail, test it, see what happens, right? And so that's the whole point with this process, is really thinking about like how we go from this today where we are into this desired outcome in the future state. Some cold hard facts. Again, the reason why I do these series and why I'm so animated when it comes to these topics about succession, about family dynamics, and just family offices is really because we've settled for ordinary in this world, right? Something has happened where we're okay with just status quo. What happens with the status quo, it just leads us to this, right? Over 60% of business owners have no formal planning of succession in place at all, even though in the next 10 years they're looking to exit, right? Why is that? Why are we not having the conversation to think about forward thinking, thinking about, okay, that is a reality that I have in 10 years. I'm looking to retire or looking to move on from this business, either through an exit strategically to an outside party or maybe internally through some estate planning, right? Thinking about that process and actually taking some action towards it. And so let's not settle for the ordinary. And here again, most plans aren't really plans at all, right? They're just ideas in people's heads and documents sitting on a shelf waiting for, I've talked about this, taking the binder off the shelf and breaking in case of emergency. That's not how we approach this process. And so let's really break that mold. And then finally, big reasons why succession plans fail is just hesitation to start, right? Procrastination, not wanting to change, not wanting to do something different. But the procrastination, if again, inside a right model, will, I would say, dispel a lot of those misbeliefs. And so let's break the pattern of procrastination, right? It's hard to do. We all have it. I have it. And it's something that when we work with other people to help us break it, it's a marvelous thing. So let's really focus on, action versus intention. We have these ideas of starting um, businesses or projects or whatnot, but let's just take action, right? Take the first step forward. Everyone intends to get the plan done someday, right? This idea of like, I have time, I will figure it out, it will eventually come to me. That's again one of the things that we have these intentions. But again, intentions without action keeps families in limbo, right? When we talk about operating business, that is a core asset of a family. Those miss opportunities to have conversations and to talk and to actually start putting things in action just create resentment and creates just again this limbo of uncertainty, right? And then let's do the basics. Let's start with the knowns, right? Let's start with what we know, perfect that, and then move on to the next piece, right? And then the other part is don't worry about being perfect day one, right? This whole process, there's no blueprint to your succession. Your succession is unique to you and you only. And so just start. There's these methodologies that we have that will help you get to where you want to go. But really, the perfection of these plans is just not a reality. Let's just move forward. And so the next piece is, conversations over concepts, right? Starting to have conversations, not these informal, you know, walking past someone saying something. No, really sitting down in a room and just having some real honest conversations, right? And so a lot of these ideas are just trapped in the founders' heads, and they have these ideas of, this person looks like they're going to be a leader. Let's go down that path without really thinking about, is that the right skill set for that individual? Does that individual want to be your success, right? So stop having those assumptions and really having conversations, right? And then talk about succession, isn't the same as just, working through it, right? So we have to talk about it. We have to, I would say, take ideas and people and just kind of mesh them together through that conversation. So I talk about that a lot of times where we have these plans, we have people, and then the glue is that conversation. So let's continue to have those conversations. And then the first breakthrough often happens in dialogue, right? Not documentation, right? Sending emails is one thing, writing things on a formal document that's sitting on a shelf is great. But when you start having conversations, you bring the human element into into the picture, and then you get a real sense of how that person feels about what you're talking to them about in terms of succession. And then also the reality of maybe that person is a diamond in the rough. I should kind of think about, this individual in my conversations. And so again, let's put some framework around this whole thing, because framework will alleviate frustration, right? When we have a plan that's 80% there, it's going to then make the next 20% easy. And so let's get ahead and put the framework of a process in place. All right. So without structure, the process feels overwhelming. So it never begins, right? If you don't know what the end looks like, how do you know where you are? And then how do you know where to begin? So let's put that framework so that we know exactly the steps to get to where we want to get to. And then again, like it's a shameless plug, but a clear framework like ABC, right, turns complexity into momentum. If you know that the phases are, hey, there's 4 phases, I'm in phase 2 or phase 3, we're almost there. Those are the things that we need to be thinking about. It's really those subconscious um, urges to move forward because the end is almost there. And then simplicity, right, creates progress. I had a client always said, kiss, 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 kiss. Keep it simple, stupid, right? Simplicity will trump anything in this world these days when it comes to just making progress. So keep it simple that everyone can be at the table and understand exactly what the game plan is. And then again, you don't need to have the whole plan, day one. Just take it in steps, right? You can have conceptually the idea of what you want to accomplish, but let's take those baby steps along the way. Small wins along the way will help create that momentum. Hey, just want to take a second of your time and let you know that there is an available scorecard for your use. It's free to use. Just comment scorecard in the comments. It's the tool that I use with a lot of my clients in our initial assessment phase, and I've digitized that into a Google form. And so it's 10 simple questions, less than 60 seconds, and it gives you a gauge of kind of where you are in the process. And you might be surprised. It's not that bad. So comment below scorecard, and we'll send it to you shortly. Thanks and have a great day. So this client always said, we'll get it done. We'll get it done in our first, I would say, introductory assessment period of our relationship and engagement. It says, hey, we'll just get it done. And what happens is, again, delays, they feel easy today, but it's going to make it harder in the future, right? So let's not take the mentality of taking the easy way out. Let's just start and kind of start having those uncomfortable conversations. And so here are some of the things that in that conversation, we had, right? It all started. It's interesting if you think about the chronological order of these comments and how it evolves as we got deeper, right? It first started off with, it's not that important right now, but you've got bigger priorities, right? When you're focused on a business and growing a business, yes, you're not thinking about succession day one, right? That's just not going to happen. But when you're 30 years into a business, that mentality of, you know, working the business and not worry about anything else except for growing that business is tough, because it's all you've known for 30 years. And so stepping back and thinking, introducing some external factor like succession might kind of change that whole dynamic of that business. So that was always a fear of this individual. And then it says the business is growing, right? Why add stress? That's already working, it's already working. So again, so you're starting to peel back some of the onions where, okay, now again, that uneasiness is not more about not the people or the business, is really the fear of just change, right? Going from a business focus to now like more global thinking in terms of how he approaches the business and also his life, right? Where he is in his life was a big piece of this as well. And so, again, not wanting to affect the business because adding stress would derail the whole process. That in itself was a problem. And I think we got through that eventually. And we'll talk about that shortly. And then it says, I've already told key people, what my intentions are, why write it down. And that is great, right? It's great that you're talking about that, but if you're not taking, I would say, a more intimate conversation and really talking about people's roles and taking the time to walk them through why you're thinking certain things, and then start documenting them. Not that they need to be formalized, but just documentation of understanding, because one person's understanding is someone else's interpretation. And so let's make sure it's clear by writing it down. And then the other part was, if I put it on paper, then I'm locked in, I'm committing to it. And that was the other piece of it, is that, no, we're not putting formalized documentation together. We're just kind of documenting the process of what we're thinking, because it just gets rid of assumptions, and it's all on one piece of paper of the intentions that you have. And so if something happens to you, you get hit by the proverbial bus, someone can pick up and say, yes, now I know what he was intending. Even though it's not formalized, it's written down somewhere. And I think this is really was these two here were I would say, the meat and potatoes of this engagement, really, right? And the last one was, I don't want to open a can of worms with my family. So it was interesting. That was one of the last takeaways from that initial conversation was, I don't want to introduce this beast of a business into my family. And just a quick background, this individual just ran this business without any family intervention or understanding. There's these two worlds, right? There was the business world and the family world. And so these last 2 points were key in this whole process, because that's how he viewed the world was, my identity is in two places, business and family. And so we'll talk about how he approached that. So just to recap this slide, you can see the wheels churning in this individual's head from where he thought he was it's not a big deal, why it's not a priority, why start, to then getting through the thought process and thinking through, hold on, the real issues that I have are twofold. It's the business side and the family, right? How is this process going to impact business and add potentially more stress to already stressful environment, and then add additional stress by now incorporating the family into that logic as well. And so I coined this individual as the reluctant navigator, right? The navigator of these two worlds and reluctant to bring them together. And so that really was the basis of the procrastination and hesitation to even start the process of succession, because they were both uneasy. And so the vision in action was the first step, right? Understanding what his thoughts were. So for 30 years, they reacted to just opportunity chasing, right? He wanted to shift away from being reactive to more clear thinking and of a plan, right? And so that's a big gap, a big bridge to go to. So how do we, kind of think about that? So that was one of his frameworks, is like, I want to get away from being reactive and being proactive. And the other part was, he knew his family wanted to be part of the business. He knew that was going to happen, but all these years, they never were part of it. And so how do we think about this process of succession and bring that family into the fray of the business? And then also on the business side, making sure that key individuals and key executives that were there were welcoming the family into the picture versus looking at them as adversaries, right? And so those were the start of this process. And the big thing for him was, starting small, right? Starting small, because I kept pushing, we need to start now. And so we agreed, let's start small, let's start now. And with that, he felt that small, consistent moves, earn, more buy-in from the team, right? And so instead of coming in, really, taking a sledgehammer to the business and say, let's look at succession and breed it throughout the business, he wanted small, predictable wins along the way. And so that's how we did it. We started with small and consistent moves. And then with the family, instead of creating this board day one and throwing him onto this committee, he really wanted to just talk about the framework. So we thought through this process of the framework of creating a board that eventually he will not be on. And so we thought about that in this process as well. So again, you're starting to see this two worlds of business and family working together. And this was the hard phase, right? Putting it into writing. That was one thing that um, it took a while, but he realized that once we started seeing things on paper, he was able to share his ideas. The conversation began. And so on the business side, he started sharing, the what if statements. If this scenario happens, this is how you should react, right? Because that for him was a big thing, going from this, creative, this reactive world and chasing opportunities now to that more proactive. He wanted people to just start thinking, forward thinking and being better planners, right, than being reactionary. And so that was a big piece in this process. And then really, you know, for the family as well as the business, taking these verbal commitments that or intentions, let's say, and start putting them down on a piece of paper, because then he was able to see kind of the map starting to form, right? How the business succession would look in terms of the executive team, how the family's involvement and at what level that involvement, was it operational? Was it more of a governance? Really started to see these two worlds, and it became almost this meshed map of how it's a Venn diagram, right? You start seeing these two worlds, and you sort of see where the two kind of connect, and that was the start of this process of meshing the two worlds together. And then, lead by letting it go, right? That was something that was important. That as again, he goes through the scenarios of what could happen. He really wanted to just step back and see this in motion. And so this is a phrase I coined from a different client, but the trial of absence for 60 days. This is a great test that I've developed over time, that it feels weird at the beginning saying I'm gone for 2 months, for 2 months. That's really what it is. But it's it's been refreshing because it gives the patriarch or matriarch in a business time to step away, to reflect, because this is a very pivotal part of their life. And so how can we extrapolate them out of the stresses of the world, get them to a place where it's calm and they can think clearly, right? And also test what they've been putting in place. And so this is definitely a hallmark of this process, this trial of absence. And then this is an interesting one that he thought would be great, is really to see his family take one strategic initiative that was from idea to outcome. Right? He wanted to see the process of how they went about the business, and thought about key initiatives that were strategic to add revenue. Because he was always chasing um, business and opportunities, but now thinking more about organic growth as a component. And so he wanted to see how they took an existing business line and really kind of grew it, right? And so this again was the framework that we took when it came to approaching this, reluctant navigator. And so as you can see, this is the assess phase, this vision and action. And then we're starting to build, right? Small, but we started. So we're building this process. And then we start putting into writing, right? Crafting the formalized plan. Not that we're committing to the plan, but kind of formalizing it. And this is where we're starting to commit, right? We're deploying some of these strategies into the real world and seeing how they operate and how they work internally, as the executives were part of this trial of absence, but also the family members really taking a strategic initiative, and going to market with it and seeing what would happen. So here is the A, B, C, D, and method in play for this individual who was, I coined, the reluctant navigator. So just key takeaways in general is that, confront the uncomfortable truth. That's really important, is to take a deep dive during that assessment phase, right? What's missing, unclear, and assumed in your current plan, right? Assumptions are not great. You need to make sure they're formalized in terms of your ideas. Then we look at clarity over complexity, right? Keep it simple, stupid. There's no reason to make things more difficult than they need to be. So what must happen if I was unavailable during that 6 days of trial absence, right? So let's take the clarity and make it easy for other people to understand, so that when I'm not here, things operate efficiently. And then alignment, right? Alignment across people is so key. Again, like we talk about these plans that are in binders and people and meshing them together. Well, in this situation, you have business and family, right? How do they work together? And the third wheel to this was the external advisors that weren't even part of the business or the family. And so, again, how do we bring it all together where everyone is on the same plan? And then the activation phase through testing, right? Having this absence period where you're gone for 60 days, or like in this example, taking an initiative from start to finish for a family just to see how they operate was a big thing. So again, pressure testing succession before life does, right? And so that's very, very key. And I say this in all my presentations, but you as a founder have tremendous influence over this entire process. So let's make sure we wield that with intention, right? Because no one else is giving you the blueprint. You are the conductor of this train. So let's make sure that we don't hesitate and we don't wait. Let's just move forward but make sure that you're influencing this process the way you want, because this is something that's near and dear to your heart. So you've built something remarkable. Now let's ensure that it endures for a long time. So again, back to the reluctant navigator, and we just talked through this process. But before we go any further, um, if you want to know where your plan stands today, take the quiz. Down in the description. There's a link to a Google form that is 10 questions, 60 seconds, kind of gives you a gauge of where your plan is. And you might be surprised of that it's not as bad as you think you are. And so if you ever need help, definitely reach out. I can help you along the way. But if anything, if you do nothing in terms of watching any more of my videos or content and just want to kind of do this on your own, this is the portion of the video that you can just take down notes and just do this on your own. Because my intentions really are to help you take something that is tried and true, this ABCD method, and really putting it in play and doing it yourself and working with your existing advisors. That's all this is for. So again, this presentation, this part of the presentation is the meat and potatoes of the program. So if we think about the method of intentional succession, right? The assess phase, right? Assessing where you really stand. That word really is kind of vague, but also intentional. Like you really need to take a deep dive on where you are today and be true to yourself. And then don't confuse activity with readiness. Just because you have documents doesn't mean you have a plan, right? You have a document sitting there, great. You have a plan, great. But if you're not acting, nothing's happening. And so let's make sure that you're acting on a plan. And then this is always something that you should be thinking about in this phase as you're kind of thinking through how you want to approach this process. Is if I stepped away tomorrow, what would people do, right? And the other part is the more important is why would they do it? So what would they do and why? And so think about that as it is today, today's state, and then the future state that you want to be in, and then bridge those two together. The build phase, right? Build the right conversations. That's the glue. That's the glue to everything is a plan and the people, mesh them together to execute. And so talk to family, key employees, bring everyone to the table, have those conversations often and early, because when we incorporate this into a process, into your everyday process, it becomes second nature. There's no issues with the business in terms of introducing additional stress because of these conversations. It's just part of the normal process of everyday life. And then this is where I've seen my help with a lot of families is being that neutral facilitator. Sometimes at the beginning, when we're starting to bring these two worlds together of business and family, there's a lot of misalignment. Family believes that they're stepping into the same operational roles that the patriarch and matriarch had, and the executive teams are assuming that they're going to take over those reins and those roles because the family has never been involved. And so there's a place for everyone at the table. It's just how do we get ourselves into a neutral state to have this conversation? So a facilitator is a great opportunity for someone to come in and really help bridge that gap. And it's not something that's permanent, but something that's temporary that just helps kind of get the motion moving in the right direction. And so that's a lot of places where a lot of families really value the work that I do with them is just helping neutralize the room. And then we get to the craft phase, right? Crafting the future that really doesn't center around you. That's the reality, is that this business is going to continue to move forward with or without you. And so how do we think about this world that you've created, that you spent 30 plus years of your life on, and really think about that next phase, right? And so the goal isn't to control from the sidelines, right? It's really to understand how can this whole process thrive without you. And then again, part of this process is you've had ideas of who you want to be successors in the process, if it's family side, if it's the business side, but continue to start identifying the right people, the structure, and really just bring clarity around those roles of who is executing what opportunity. And so that those are key. And then the deployment stage, right? Deploy with intention, not perfection. Let's test these things out. Let's see what happens. Put it in the real world, put it into play in the business and see what happens, because then that you'll find if it's going to work or not. So your plan doesn't need to be perfect, right? It just needs to start, especially when it comes to procrastination. Let's just take baby steps. Just take the first step forward. And then again, this is something that kind of really makes sense is just keep running scenarios, and they don't have to be these formal war game type scenarios. It's just as we have these conversations and we start putting things in play, let's just test them out. Let's just see what happens. And your intentions are, if it fails, we've learned something. Let's move forward. If it works, great. Let's document it and make it part of our process. And so let's protect everything that you've built, right? Preserve your family's trust. And it won't happen by accident. But it takes intention. You have to really move things forward with your influence. And I know it's going to be hard to start this process, but if you think about the methodology we've talked about, the ABC method, ABCD method, excuse me, it's going to put the framework in place that helps you at least start the process, know where you are today, and know where you're going to be in the future. And again, just want to just reiterate this is in terms of my background and experience in the family office space, it's really eye-popping, what really successful families do. And a lot of it is just not based on hope. Hope is not a strategy. I've seen good, bad, and the ugly within the family office space, but the ones that really get it done, the ones that survive generation over generation, really lead with purpose. They communicate with clarity and they plan with intention, right? That's really the three pieces to this whole process of successful planning. So let's be predictable. Let's have predictable results in an unpredictable world, right? And so put the process in place. This is just a quick disclaimer for legal purposes, but really want to take this opportunity to commend you for taking the first step and learning about succession, even though it's going to be hard to take that next step. Procrastination is something that we all deal with. And so, if there's anything I can do with this video content, this presentation, or even the scorecard, take the scorecard, see where you're at. There's nothing else you need to do with me. You don't need to engage me. But hopefully, this is this idea to help you kind of gauge where you are and kind of where you want to be. And so I'm here on this journey with you. I hope you're are having a great day and are going to be successful. And thank you for allowing me to be on this journey with you. So cheers to your success. Hey, just want to take a second of your time and let you know that there is an available scorecard for your use. It's free to use. Just comment scorecard in the comments. It's the tool that I use with a lot of my clients in our initial assessment phase, and I've digitized that into a Google form. And so it's 10 simple questions, less than 60 seconds, and it gives you a gauge of kind of where you are in the process. And you might be surprised. It's not that bad. So comment below scorecard, and we'll send it to you shortly. Thanks and have a great day.